Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. Welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm talking to Sam Reya, Deputy Chief Constable for Dorset Police. If you're a regular listener to this show, you'll know that our prime focus is about speaking to business owners and business leaders and entrepreneurs about their journey and how it's evolved. However, I'm very passionate about the subject of leadership and love exploring leadership in all its forms. And therefore, every so often, it's great to get a leader from a less businessy environment to talk to us about their experiences and approach to leadership. And surely one of the more difficult positions of leadership is one involving law enforcement. Prior to her appointment with Dorset Police, Sam spent several years in Devon and Cornwall Police as Chief Superintendent and Commander, leading frontline policing services, investigation, neighbourhood policing and partnerships. In 2013, she established the Southwest Women in Leadership programme, which endeavours to help female police personnel realise their full potential. She was also specifically selected to spend 10 weeks with the FBI at their National Academy. It's both intriguing and inspiring to get a leadership perspective from someone in such a challenging, complex and impactful sector. Among other things, there are discussions about self-development, public responsibilities and how COVID affected crime. I also couldn't help asking Sam about how police dramas on TV compare to the reality of life. Unfortunately, there is some intermittent sound disturbance from time to time in the early part of the recording and during this conversation, caused somewhat appropriately by police radios. But otherwise, I hope you enjoy the conversation. Sam, welcome to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you for having me today.
It's great to have you on the show. I'm always interested to talk to senior leaders in organisations that aren't just in the traditional business world. And so today, we're exploring the joys and challenges of being a leader in the police force, particularly in your role as Deputy Chief Constable for Dorset Police. So, for our listeners, we probably should start with that, shouldn't we? So in a nutshell, what does your position and role as Deputy Chief Constable for Dorset entail?
So I know it's public service, but it is in this particular role very much about running a business. So that is around making sure that the funding's coming in, that we're putting boots on the ground, that we're out there delivering a service. So it really is about operating at that sort of chief executive sort of level.
Okay.
And delivering operations. So I'm effectively the chief operating officer for the force.
Okay.
And that involves everything.
That's a wide-ranging role then.
It really is. And that's what's so great about it, is that you are the person that sort of has the umbrella over the organisation, policing. We're all about going out there, delivering a public service, delivering to our communities. And it's how do we do that with limited resources, limited money, and also making sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. So that's really effectively what I'm here to do.
Right. And so I suppose that you already alluded to some of them. There's some of those challenges that business leaders face or business owners face are exactly the same, regardless of the fact that it's public rather than the private sector.
Absolutely. I think it is all about making every single penny count because it's public money. Yeah. That's really important. It's also the severity of what we're out there dealing with. I think that probably makes it different. and also the expectations of the public. So that need to really ensure that you protect the trust that the community have in policing, absolutely critical. But everything else in terms of operations, fleet, estates, making sure that we pay people on time, all of those things are just like running a business anywhere else.
So it's the COO role.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and we're going to cover some of those, particularly the critical decision-making processes and those kind of things, I hope, during the course of our conversation. So what most excites you about the role, Sam?
So I've got 25 years service now, and I joined as a young PC up in the northeast with Northumbria Police, and was given it a bit of a shot actually, just to say, I'll give this a go and see if I like it. And I absolutely loved it from day one, and that hasn't changed. I joined to be part of a team, to give something back to the public, and also to make sure that we were dealing with the people that were out there doing bad things. That hasn't changed. It's evolved. I'm managing teams now and overseeing teams, and really setting strategies in terms of how we look at policing now and into the future. But I think for me, it's always been about trying to make a difference, making sure that we look after our people so that they go out and deliver that really amazing service to the public that we're looking to deliver. And really, I think every day is different. I am a firearms commander, I'm a public order commander, so I even as deputy, I managed to step back into the operational quite a lot.
Is that usual, or is that unusual for somebody in your role within the police force?
I think it's probably a bit more usual in the smaller forces.
Okay.
So, where everybody has to wear a few hats, everybody has to muck in. But for me, I really enjoy that because it connects me back with what we're there to deliver. So, dealt with some really fantastic things through my career, really high level investigations and, critical major incidents. So for me, it's yes, I'm doing this very specific operational chief operating officer role, but actually I'm still a police officer. I still put my kit on and go out there and could deliver as a PC.
Fantastic. So that probably does lead on to another discussion point is, 25 years in the force, started right on, as a PC and worked your way through to a point at which, very senior leader, making strategic decisions. How does the police force kind of educate you and develop you as an individual? Or how have you done that yourself, maybe, to get to this point? Because 25 years sounds like a long period of time, but to go from PC on the ground, feet on the ground, as you say, to the role you've got now is quite a significant leap. So what's that development journey been like for you, Sam?
So I would say there's three critical things really. First one is personal responsibility. Yeah. So you've got to take personal responsibility for developing yourself, and that's throughout your career. So I've done things like I've been a detective, I've been a sexual offences liaison officer. So they'll give you a course for that, but actually learning then how to do that really well comes from you, and mentoring, coaching I've relied on really heavily. The second bit is vocational training. So you do get training through your career. So being a detective, there's a detective program. So obviously I went through a lot of that. And then the third bit for me is who you surround yourself with, and links back to the coaching and mentoring, I suppose. And I've relied really heavily on those people, that my go-to people, that I can say, because this job is so vast, to say, have I got this right? Am I going in the right direction with this? How have you experienced that in another force? And I've got a network now that's sort of national, and I do that for other people as well, which is really important. But a couple of really key things for me is before you move up to executive level, you go on the senior command course, and there is a 3-day program sort of interview process that you go through where you do modules over a 3-day period, and then you'll go into senior command. And that course is fantastic because it's 50 people roughly from across the country, and that's police officers and staff members who are sitting at that level. So not only do you get access to amazing speakers and training over a 10-week period, but you also then get that sort of peer, you build that peer support. And then one of the best things that I've done in my job is I had 10 weeks with the FBI at Quantico.
Okay.
On their National Academy. And I did that as a superintendent. And I put my hat in the ring for it, never expected to get it because at the time I was in Devon and Cornwall, and they send somebody once every 5 years. So, and managed to get it. And there I was in Quantico, 230 people on a course being led by them. So again, I've had some really fantastic training like that I've been supported around. But going back to that first point is you have to invest in yourself.
It's that growth mindset, isn't it? That I think every business leader, leader needs, is to have that mentality that I'm going to be a better person today than I was yesterday.
Yes.
I'm going to push myself, stretch myself, but what knowledge do I need? Where can I seek it? And it's really interesting that you took, because, and I suppose in the private sector it's used a lot, that kind of having mentors, non-execs around, coaches around you to support. And you're saying that's no different in the public sector. And
Definitely
it's been
not.
big contributing factor to your growth and success.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that policing's really learned over the years. So you can put somebody on a training course to be a senior investigating officer, or, you could put together a DI's course, detective inspector's course. But actually it's what you do after the courses that's absolutely critical, where that person sort of grows in strength and really goes out and is able to deliver that role. And let's face it, the roles that we're expecting some of our people to do are life and death. Yeah. So you can't just have somebody who takes a little while to perform well. You need them on it, you need them to be picking it up and to be really, because what we'll do is we'll put them on a course and we'll expect them to go live with that skill set the next day. So that mentoring and that coaching and that support, peer support, really important.
And how does that work with performance management, in terms of the team? And you send someone on a course and they're doing, come back to do a critical role, but the police force has this tradition, doesn't it? You're in for as long as you want to be, and not in for life, is the perception as me as member of the Joe Public. And you promote people into roles and perhaps they don't perform in that role. Does that make performance management of people more difficult, do you think, in the police force than other organisations?
I think it does, and we're experiencing it at the minute with the uplift of police officers. Okay. So if you imagine, I know it's been talked about in the press, but over the years, 35,000 police officers were taken out of policing. Yeah. We're now in the position where the Conservatives have supported this 20,000 back into policing, but it's still not going to take us up to where we were. And the problem is that we've had to go into this massive engine room now to try and get people through. But what it is going to mean, and what we're experiencing at the minute, is we've got a lot of inexperience coming through. Yeah. So that bit that I've just talked about the need to have those experienced officers coaching and bringing people through, it's more difficult. Yeah. And so, great that we're getting this uplift, but definitely an impact then on the quality of what people are going out and doing. So how do you make sure you strengthen your sergeants, your supervisors? How do you make sure that your training maybe is a bit longer, because you need to put more training in because they won't have that out on the ground. So it's things like that really do impact on performance. The other thing that we have, of course, is we have a shortage of detectives. So nationally, we're working very hard around that in terms of how do we bring people through the organisation. We're offering things like people being able to join the organisation as a detective, which we've never had before. Okay. But that brings some issues with it as well, because we've got to make sure they can still have the basic skills as a police officer. So they still have to come in and do uniform. They still have to get out on patrol. They still need to understand those basics. So the lead time in is longer. All of those things impact on performance. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The plates you spin.
For hours on it
exactly. I know. I'll probably bore you to tears with it. But again, it's I think what I would say about Dorset Police is we're very nimble. So we're able then, with some of these issues that are coming up, and trying to look as far ahead as we can, you know, things like cyber skills, you know, how do we cope with the change in fraud, you know? I mean, you're more likely to be a victim of crime in your own home than you are, you know, going out on the street and something happening. So, you know, how do we create the capacity with the same amount of resources, and what do we prioritise?
And a different skill set needed for the way that crime itself is evolving.
Yeah.
So interesting, because you've talked a lot about, you know, Dorset being nimble, Dorset being already, in the short conversation we had, as, you know, a small force. That means that you can, you know, still do some direct policing and all of those things. So how do you think the Dorset police force is different to maybe Manchester, the Met, you know, these greater, larger kind of organisations? And do you have flexibility to do things differently, or is there a lot of dictate from government, whatever creed of government that may be at the time?
Yeah, so I mean, we're still an organisation of 2,500 people.
Yeah.
So when I talk about a smaller force, it's not still not small, is it really? But you know, but when you compare us to 32,000 in the Met, and, you know, in Greater Manchester, it is significantly different. So, I mean, at that executive level, what I would say is it's harder work, because in Greater Manchester you have a bigger executive. You have, you know, that you have that more shared responsibility. Whereas we've just grown by a second assistant chief constable, recognising we need that capability. But when I first came into this force, just over 2 years ago, I was the only assistant chief. And you were in charge of everything in terms of delivery. It was virtually impossible. So you've got this smaller executive team, everybody wearing more hats. So it's just a very different role. Whereas in Greater Manchester, you might have a ACC crime, and you'll have an ACC local policing, and you'll have all these different roles. Whereas here, we all muck in. But that's quite a nice thing. So we're an executive of 6 people. So there's the chief, myself, and then the rest of the team. And we work really closely together. We support each other. We step in for each other because we have to. So that's interesting. But in terms of Dorset Police, what I would say is we are able to move things quicker. So if we need to bring in a change programme, or we need to say, actually, this is a performance priority, we can put some shift behind that. So you can
set strategy, and you know, you've got your kind of, this is what you need to deliver, and you can set strategy as you go as an executive team of 6, which again is very similar to what a board of directors would be in a commercial organisation, isn't it?
And I think in terms of performance scrutiny, you know, we're quite heavy on that. We do a lot of detail around that, and it allows you to understand the areas where you need to, you know, focus and improve upon. The negatives, of course, to being part of a bigger force is that you don't have the flexibility around the resource. You know, we do have limited resources here, and it does feel like that. So we don't get any more resource for summer policing. Yet, you know, last year we had 25 million people here over the summer. So, you know, there's no extra policing for that. We just need to look and move our resources slightly differently. We have to prioritise certain things. You know, but we're very good at that. So that's what I mean about that flexibility, that ability to be able to say, this is our priority. Okay, we just need to jiggle things around and refocus. I'm not sure Greater Manchester, and we've seen it in the Met. I mean, I do feel for them. 32,000 people working in that organisation. I oversee professional standards and ethics for the force. You know, imagine trying to do that over 32,000 people.
Over 10 times the size of people.
And that ability to shift, you know, and respond. And I could go on about Dorset Police, but I think one of the things that we do really value is our relationship with the public and our communities. And I think that, having worked in 3 forces, the relationship we have and the trust we have and the support we have from our communities is overwhelmingly good. And it allows us to do our job far better than if, you know, we were in a position where we'd lost that confidence.
Definitely. And I suppose it's like any other change management process or system, isn't it, that you can make change happen when you're smaller and you, like you say, more nimble and all of those things. So when you look at a commercial organisation, and leadership within a commercial organisation. I think we're starting to touch on what some of the similarities are, but let's just talk about what some of the differences are, and perhaps, Sam, what some of the things you're envious about if you were instead a business leader of a commercial organisation of 2,500 people. What do you think some of those differences are? And I know it's a hard question because you've had 25 years in the force, but
I think budget, investment, and that ability that if you're doing well as an organisation, you make more money potentially if that's part of your business.
Reinvest back in,
and you can reinvest back in. Whereas what we do is we do better. And we improve and we deliver that performance. Our crime comes down. I think last time I looked, we were around 6th in the country in terms of low crime rate. Fantastic. And then you have great detection rates and all these sort of things. You don't get any more money for that. So
No.
You work a bit harder, but what you get back is the fact you've got safer communities. I also think that because that trust and confidence that I talked about before is so important, we cannot let people down. We have to demonstrate every day that we are out there working for our communities, and when we lose that or something happens, and let's face it, we operate in this really complex risk environment, things are going to go wrong, and whereas a company makes a mistake potentially, and yes, it's not very good, it impacts on trust, but not the same way as policing, because it goes to the core of human beings, doesn't it? And how they feel safe. So I think that's another thing for me is we are the most scrutinised public service and an organisation in the country, in the world. And sometimes that is exhausting. So it's good because it pushes us to be better, and also by having that scrutiny, the public can look and say, yeah, that's been scrutinised and that's been looked at, whether that's the independent police complaints, whether that's HMIC coming in to look at us. But sometimes it is just relentless because, unfortunately, some people die, that we are dealing with, and, because of the circumstances, and we are then scrutinised around that. Absolutely the right thing to do, but it can sometimes just feel relentless.
Okay, that's a really great answer. And if we talk about the funding then, I mean, that is a constraint, isn't it? Because you can't set your own, you do set your own budgets, but you get told what funding you've got, I suppose, I'm surmising here, year on year, and then you have to work to that budget, whatever it may be. And like you say, you can't, you don't reinvest profits back in because they don't exist. You can't seek outside investment. No. That's quite constraining, isn't it? Yeah. In terms of running an organisation.
Yeah, we've got better over the years. So things like, major events. So some of the commercial events now will get money back from that if we have to put policing, the football, and that type of thing. But that's not money generation. That is paying for what they're getting. And the issues with the policing budget are that often it's last minute. So you'll find out within months of when your budget is coming out. So it's always a case of we plan for the best, we plan for the worst, and we're always like on tenterhooks.
And probably end up somewhere in the middle.
and then just decisions like the government deciding on the pay award. So all of a sudden now we've got a deficit for next year that we are having to work. How do we find this money to make sure that we pay our staff and our officers the increased pay award, because that comes from us. So it might be a government decision, but actually it impacts on us, and it impacts directly on the frontline policing, because how many officers can we afford? How many staff members can we afford that do this amazing role for us as PCSOs and our control rooms, and all of the back office functions and all of that keeps this force going. Where do we find then the resources? Can we afford to keep police stations open? That is constant for us. Constantly running through that to see, what it is that we need to do to make sure we reinvest as well, because we've also got cyber fraud, increases around some crime types, violent crime, those types of things that we equally need to put some resources to.
And resource. Yeah, challenging, isn't it? So one of the other things that one day I'll stop talking about it on the podcast. But I think, you know, the COVID pandemic, you know, hopefully, God, you know, has, God willing, is sort of passed, although COVID is still with us. But that's seen exponential changes for many businesses, and also, you know, societal changes. How's that affected the police force?
Hugely. I would say our policing landscape and our community has changed. So we're definitely seeing that around certain crime types. While the police is under pressure, so are all the other public services. So things like we're seeing increased mental health in society, and you know, stresses and strains on like the ambulance service, for example, and all of these things directly impact on policing, because when those things aren't available, or when there's an escalation around somebody's mental health, the police often then have to step in and deal with it as
First
an
point of
incident.
call,
So I think in terms of externally, we're seeing that. I think there is an impact of children being out of schooling for 2 years. You know, we're seeing the impact of that as well, and also just some of the crime types that have just shifted, like burglary. That's dropped really unusually. Because people were at home, they were in there. They were in there. But then the whole fraud that I've already mentioned, you know, that has increased, because then there's more of an engine room, you know, working away from where the crime's being committed. And then that's externally, and that's just to name but a few. But internally as well, we're finding people are less likely to take overtime. So this whole thing around workforce balance, and we're not getting people through our contact management. So up in our force control room, we've really struggled to recruit, because there's so much employment out there because of the impacts of COVID. So that's had an impact on us. But yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like there has been a shift, that we're policing very differently. And it has brought some massive positives. So new ways of working, of course. Most of our officers and staff now have a laptop. And that was something that happened 2 years ago, when we pushed out hundreds of laptops, like within a short period of time, just to make sure we had people working at home, they weren't coming into the environment. And that's something then that we're building on now.
That flexibility can now continue and have a benefit.
So it's not all negative.
No.
You know, it is, I think there has been a sort of rebalancing around people's work life to home, and I think we've seen this real expansion and increase around technology, and how we are operating differently across our workforce.
So again, we're seeing some real similarities with the commercial world, aren't we? That are seeing the same things, you know. Service proposition, product proposition might have changed because of people's attitudes changing, and but the workforce shift is significant, isn't it? Like you say, you know, that desire maybe for better, you know, work-life balance, retiring early. I assume that's possibly a thing, you know, definitely trying to find and resource people. So, you know, and that resourcing of people, finding that, you know, that shortage of people that are available to join, and, you know, trying to attract them is a challenge that all organisations are facing. So how are you trying to overcome that?
So it is an amazing job. You know, I mean, I don't know many jobs where you can, and I'm talking about police officers as well as the staff jobs that we have as well, is where you can come in and make such a difference. You know, every day the impact that you have is incredible. And I think sometimes we get a bit used to that and we don't think about it. You know, we're a bit immune to it. So I think the offer that we have is, you know, if you want to work in an environment where you're having a direct impact on your community and the public, then you can't get much better than policing. I also think as well the new ways of working, so that flexibility is really important, and we're reimagining our estate at the moment in terms of where people are, where they're working from home. So I think our offer, we need to be an employer of choice. I think the fact that we're really working quite hard around the diversity of our workforce as well. So my executive is 50% women. You know, really positive, and, you know, just trying to get people to interested in the organisation from all walks of life. You know, offering part-time, offering flexibility is really, really important. And also we're also going through a review of wages at the moment, and again that'll be something that will become a deficit.
Come out that budget.
I know, but you know, recognising that we're not always up there in terms of what's on offer for people. So if you're saying come up and work in a control room, which is an amazing job, sit there, do these wonderful things, be that support for that person on the end of the phone, that victim, or you can go and work in a supermarket for the same price, then that can't be right, because the risk that person's carrying is significant. But what we find, I mean, I know we're not losing people, so people are sticking with us. We're finding we're not losing people at 7 years, 8 years that we thought we might.
Okay.
People are still joining for life, and that includes our staff members as well. You know, that's not just the police officer side of the house, which is really good, because you get to keep all that rich experience and you know, knowledge.
And is there a distinction in the organisation between the officers and the support, and how do you deal with that, Sam?
So I'd like to think there isn't, but I think it can happen, and I think it can happen in different teams, and we work really hard to make sure that we deal with that, and if that does come out, then it would be challenged. You know, I think we are one team, and one of the real strengths of this force of the people, they're just fantastic. We've got great people, and you know, and a lot of mixed teams. So imagine the control room that I've already talked about, but I've been down today to Weymouth. You've got our PCSOs working within our neighbourhood teams and working with the teams down there. You know, we've got our intelligence directorate, which is overwhelmingly staff members. You know, they are the engine room for intelligence and making sure we are where we should be in terms of dealing with tackling crime and disorder, etc. So I think the mix is great, you know, and what I would say is if there is an issue, we'd jump on it, you know, and that's not to say we don't always get it perfect, because it's people, isn't it?
It's people, isn't it?
It's people, yeah.
And it's not, you know, it's not a science, is it?
It's
you know?
not, no.
It's definitely not. But then, you know, there's some great philosophies there, isn't it? Is that one team culture, any organisation I've ever led, far smaller than the organisations you've led, Sam. You know, it's always about we are one team. It doesn't matter whether you're the receptionist, you know, the internal finance person, or the partner director leading the delivery of the service. We're one team, and we can't do what we do unless we all do the roles, and that's got to be the philosophy, hasn't it?
I think the first time I saw that there could be a sort of differentiation between, and I didn't see it, but I went in to run a project as a chief inspector, and so we had 50-50 police officers and police staff, because it was very much an operational system. And it was there where I saw it for the first time, and that was one of the things, you know, you've got to get your arms, I had 50 people working for me then, arms around them to say, you know, this is one team, there was fractions between people, you know, but actually it soon got resolved, and that's it, isn't it? Don't hide away from it, deal with it.
And I suppose that's, I don't know if this is an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it. You always imagine that the police force can be quite a political organisation to work within. Is that a misconception, do you think?
I think it is, actually. I think we've got, obviously, the Office of Police and Crime Commissioners now that are there to hire and fire the chief and hold us to account on behalf of the public. And I would say that's more political than the actual running of a police organisation. I, hand on heart, believe and see every day that people are trying to do what's best for their communities. It's not politically driven. I think sometimes we seem to be under, the last few years, more political pressure around certain things. So violence against women and girls, quite rightly, and you know, the most recently the race action plan that's coming down and will mean that we'll have to do certain things, and you know, political pressure around protest and things like that. But for me, I always talk to my team and the organisation about, we need to do what's right for our public and the communities, and we take that into account, but that's not what drives us. It's about what's right for Dorset's communities, because it's very different to what Devon and Cornwall are doing,
Yeah.
or Greater Manchester are doing. They all have slightly different flavours.
Yeah.
They need slightly different things. So you need to understand your community, absorb the political pressures to a certain degree, and take account of those, but do what's right in
And
your
I
delivery.
suppose that is the job of the executive, isn't it? Is to hear the political pressures, the noise, the agenda, but then make sure you're doing what's right for the community.
Absolutely,
and letting your team underneath deliver.
And offer a bit of protection as well, because, not everything can be a priority. And that's the difficulty as well, is that I know there are certain crime types that we don't deal with because we can't. No. Because it's just not a priority compared with other things that are really critical and harmful to the community.
Okay.
So there's those different, you have to get those different service levels right.
Yeah.
So what service do you get for this crime? What service do you get for this crime? And actually, what's the victim at the end of it? And what do they need in terms of that vulnerability?
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just looking over your shoulder now because you've got your purpose there, which is just resonating with everything you've just said, actually, which is, for the listeners, is tough on crime, keeping people safe, putting victims first.
Absolutely,
and it's there on your notice board right by your desk, so it's interesting to
really simple message. And and we very much shifted the last 12 months in terms of and this is as a result of COVID, going on that front foot proactively, and being far more out there in our communities in terms of just those real high harm offenders. And we're seeing that with our crime team, Op Viper, we've got running, which is one of our drugs initiatives, Op Relentless as well. So, really pulling together the resources that we can to go out and deal with those real high harm offenders.
So, obviously what we're also seeing within commercial organisation is generational change. And, managing different generations is a challenge. They come with different expectations and things, and a different kind of, I suppose, upbringing. The world is changing all the time, and that clearly presents numerous challenges. But is that increased further when you've got a long-standing organisation with quite a lot of traditions? Perhaps the traditions aren't quite there now, but again, a perception is there's a long-standing traditions within the police force. And how do you manage all of that generational change, balancing with keeping with tradition, recognising who you are and what you are and what's brought you to this point? I mean, that is a subject again in itself, isn't it, Sam?
And it is definitely. And what I would say is, when you've got a policing career now that goes up to 35 and 37 years and goes all the way through the generations you've just talked about, I mean, and some of our police staff have been with us 45 years, so just absolutely huge. And the way I look at it, I look at it quite pragmatically, really. That experience is great. So again, Weymouth this morning, walked into one of the teams, and we've got statement takers in there. They are retired police officers from up country who've retired down here and just want a little job statement taking.
Okay.
And they're doing a fantastic job for us, and they're probably up to their 45th year, And then I'm also really protective of the young people we've got coming through, because there is a responsibility, there is care and nurturing that I think was probably missing when I joined 25 years ago. You were sort of like, in you go, off you go, and get on with it. Everything was a shock, the first time you dealt with lots. And I was tutored then by a 29-year service PC. And to be fair, we didn't really do much in my tutorship. It was only when I started working with some people younger in service. So I'm a bit protective of the young ones, because people go, the new generation, they don't get their hands stuck in, they don't work overtime and all that sort of thing. But what they do bring with them, and what we've missed in policing, is recruiting the young people and the young in service, because it's not just young people, it's people on second careers, and bringing with them all this brilliant knowledge and experience of life. And also, challenging us to be better. They don't put up with some of the things I would have put up with 25 years ago. And we need to be challenged on that.
That's how you become a better organisation, isn't it? But I'm just thinking about it again now. That sort of period where you weren't allowed to recruit, that must have really hurt, because there might be a generation that's missing nearly in terms of the force, isn't there?
I think Dorset, it was before my time, but had 2 or 3 years where they didn't bring in new recruits. I mean, I think that's damage. I think now when you reflect back on that, and it was austerity, so they really didn't have any choice. But I think, you've missed that drip feed of difference coming through. And I think the different entry levels we have now for police officers in particular, so you can come in, you can do 3 years, do a degree. So anybody out there who fancies joining the police, you can come and get a degree over the 3 years as well and get paid as a police officer and still do a great job for your communities. But I think that's been really important, opening the doors in different ways, so we're attracting different people from all ranges of walks of life.
Fantastic. Right, we're close to the end of our conversation, but I could talk to you for hours. I'm fascinated, as I always am, when I speak to a leader in a different type of organisation. But we are coming to a close. So, the movies and television series, no doubt, glamorise at times your profession. Just out of interest, which aspects of what is presented is really close to being real life, and which do you think are just not a portrayal at all?
So I actually really love cop series.
Okay.
I really like The Line of Duty. I mean, that is so far off the chart. It's unbelievable.
Off the chart in terms of not being reality?
Not being the reality whatsoever. And I was head of professional standards when I was in Devon and Cornwall Police.
Okay.
And the whole sort of corporate, whole sort of corruption side of things. And it really is... out the ballpark in terms of reality.
I take some pleasure from that, actually. I can just enjoy it and watch it for what it is.
And the thing is, that whole team wouldn't be in that department because they're all actually slightly corrupt as well, but I do love it. And there are aspects of it though, procedurally, that are right.
Which is one of the things people love about the programme, is that it does try and represent that piece of policing.
So the sort of interview, that interview, being on it, having your evidence, drip feeding evidence, the putting the person under pressure, that's quite good. And also I think as well, just shows sort of, so that team would not have time to just do that case. That case would probably be one of 20 that they were dealing with, we were talking about the demands earlier. But the other one I really like is Scott and Bailey, which is the 2 women on the major crime team. Yes. Now that one is more procedurally correct. And, a lot of that, obviously, again, it's a drama. They've got to make it interesting. But I really like that one, and I think that's probably one of the ones I've actually seen that's close
more
to the
representative
truth. And that whole thing about the team and the personalities, and that's the beauty of working in policing. You get to work on these amazing teams with people and deal with some incredible stuff, But I think the biggest thing that they get wrong, if you like, is, and they have to do it because it makes it more dramatic and more interesting, is just the integrity of people. And some of the things, the unacceptable behaviour that we do not accept now. And those small cases that hit the press now, and we've seen some, haven't we, with the Met. We've had some cases that have met the press in terms of individuals. They are individual, very small cases in organisations of thousands of people.
And you get that in any organisation, that people that don't quite perform as they should, or aren't quite performing in the right way, or haven't quite got the right ethics. That happens in the commercial world too, doesn't it?
Definitely. So that's the only thing for me, is that, if you looked at all those programmes, there's a corrupt police officer everywhere, isn't there? And what I would say is that most of the cases that we get coming through our PSD now are people reporting things that they've seen in their team that they're not happy with, or is put forward, and people challenging each other, which I think has been a massive positive over the last few years. Which
is brilliant, isn't it? And again, it's probably something that's happening more, and it's a different, level, not so serious clearly, but that's what you are starting to see now in commercial organisations, where people put the values on the wall. They used to go on the wall, everybody used to ignore them, but people are being more held to account, rightfully. If an organisation says that's who we are, that's what we represent, that's what needs to be done practically day in, day out on the ground, isn't it? So, very final question. I think we've heard a lot about your definition of success in terms of Dorset Police and in your role, which has been brilliant. And thank you for being so open and honest in your responses. But in terms of you as an individual, what is your personal definition of success, Sam?
Ooh, what a good question. So I have got to a position that I never thought I'd get to. I joined as a PC and I thought it'd be great to be a sergeant. And then here I am 25 years later doing this incredible job. And so I am thankful for that every day. And when things are really difficult, when I'm getting calls at 2:00 in the morning, or we have a major incident down at the beach, or we have something big happening, and it's at times that has infiltrated my life, my family, and caused stresses and strains, I just sit back and think, I've got the best job in the world. And I think sometimes, when you've got your head down and you're working so very, very hard, you don't actually step back and just take a breath and consider where you are and what you can see that you're achieving through your team. So that's really important for me, that that the whole team is together delivering. I talked about how we work together as one team. That is, if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be a successful police organisation. And when that's going wrong, I'm really in there to sort that out and say, why isn't that working and what do we do? So for me personally, it's about carrying on this role, making sure that I don't take it for granted, make sure that I actually, continue to love what I'm doing and to wrap my arms around the organisation to make sure it's as successful as it can be.
Brilliant, Sam. I've loved having you as a guest on the Evolve to Succeed podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed and inspired individual and business leader. If you enjoyed this episode, then please help us by rating, reviewing and subscribing. We really value your feedback and would love to have you along for future episodes. And please don't forget to learn more about Evolve by going to evolvemembers.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.